Welcome to the fourth edition of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's Collecting Journeys video series. We're very glad you're here, and today we're very glad to have Elizabeth Sodero, who's a fellow of the RPSC, to talk about her collecting journey. Elizabeth began collecting as a 5-year-old in Sydney, Nova Scotia, where she loved stamps and the world they pictured. In the 1950s, she joined Doug and Mary Patrick's CBC Stamp Club with a 10-cent membership for which she received a pin and subsequently spent many Saturdays by the radio. In the 1950s, she expanded her collecting to include worldwide, trading with friends, including her husband Peter, but without a real permanent focus. During the period of the 1960 to 75 period, Elizabeth moved to Halifax and, like many of us, took a hiatus from collecting. In the 1970s, her daughter Jane joined the Nova Scotia Junior Stamp Club, spurring her husband Peter and her to join the Senior Club. From 1980 onward, she served as Nova Scotia Stamp Club as a director, as the secretary, a brief time as the newsletter editor, and even a short stint as treasurer. She also participated in the Nova Scotia Stamp Club's spin-off groups, including the Nova Scotia Postal History Group. In 1999, she was elected a director of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada and was involved in the slide program coordinator position. She suddenly became vice president of the RPSC in 2007, having been made a fellow of the RPSC in 2003. Elizabeth's collecting interests include the Admiral issue, which quickly evolved into an on-cover collecting of the particular issues of 5, 10, and 8 cents, with an emphasis on Nova Scotia postal history. She also collects the Cunard cover series, Cowlback Island, the Nova Scotia bill stamps, and morning covers. In 2000, Elizabeth attended the Glasgow 2000 Philatelic exhibition, where it became quite evident to her that what really interested her was social philately. She has participated on a number of local and national exhibition committees, with a special interest in children's and youth booths, including hospitality. She's exhibited locally and nationally, including the US. When traveling, she always includes time to explore local stamp doings and can often be found exploring stamp shops or tables in London, Paris, rural France, and Gibraltar for hidden treasures. Elizabeth, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Sure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your family when you were growing up?
I grew up as an only child, therefore I was self-amusing. Parents had no interest in collecting stamps, that is. No interest at all. In fact, my mother found the stamps a darn nuisance because they were scattered around everywhere. My father's family, there were 5 boys, none of whom were stamp collectors, but their grandfather was inspector of post offices in Nova Scotia. He had served as a colonel in the Riel Rebellion days and had served as a member of the local legislature and was awarded a plum when he resigned his seat for the premier to take place and became inspector of post offices. And yet no interest in those 5 boys.
Amazing, amazing. Did any of your friends collect? Any of your school friends?
A couple of them did, and one who was a school friend, starting in grade 5, who became my husband many years later, and we exchanged stamps, grade 5 level, grade 6.
For some of our listeners, the idea of the CBC Stamp Club will be something they don't know anything about. Can you tell us a little bit about what the CBC Stamp Club was all about?
It was Doug and Mary Patrick who ran it, organized it, and I think there were thousands of members. we gathered around the radio, as you did in those days. And I think Peter and I perhaps gathered around a radio together with our little booklet and our stamps, because you did get a little package of, I think, 50 stamps when you joined for your 10 cents. And it was great. I mean, you looked forward to it all week. CBC stamps. Oh, wow.
Did they talk about just Canadian stamps, or were there other?
I suspect it was worldwide. I can't remember many details. Just that feeling of, oh, this is important. You know, here we are. We're part of this organization. It was a thrill.
Yeah, that's right, for certain.
Before television.
Yeah, that's exactly. Imagine a world before television, and now a lot of the kids that I work with don't even watch television. They just watch YouTube and things like that. So it's 3 generations removed for certain. So when you started collecting, did you focus on just Canadian stamps, or was it worldwide as well?
It would have been worldwide. And the more exotic the country, the more exciting it was. And to get those triangular stamps, or those little tiny sort of half stamps. And I had the worldwide album, and very dutifully put my stamps in the album. I was very fortunate as about a 7-year-old to be taken to a house in North Sydney, where a man whose name was Fred Crawley collected the map stamp. And he had pages and pages and pages of the variations in the map stamp. And I was absolutely astounded how exciting this was. So that.
Yeah, for certain. I had a similar experience with a man who collected French stamps, and who was a friend of my grandfather's, and he collected the Normandy, the ocean liner Normandy stamp, and he had album after album of all the varieties and of different uses, and I just thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yes.
You know, yeah, for certain. Well, they are little works of art for sure.
They are.
You know.
Yes.
Or should we say they were in the past? Maybe some of them couldn't be considered that today, but they really remarkable thing. So when you were collecting at various times in your life, are you one of those people who was more excited about the hunt for the stamp or about acquiring it?
I can't say that one was more than the other. I'm thrilled by the hunt. I mean, I can spend hours and hours and hours going through a dealer's supply. And if I come away with nothing, okay, that's just part of it. But if I get something, just as exciting.
I think one of the things that's changed, I know from when I was a boy, there were 2 stamp shops in the town of New York where I grew up. And it was very interesting to go in and actually be able to go through the dealer's stock and look personally at all these stamps, to actually see them in front of you.
Yes.
But he was also somewhat limited in what he could carry and what he had. And I always find today we can find anything we want on the internet. And see examples of it. But
I may correct you, not everything we want, because I have one item that I'd like to get and I can't get it. And it's worth nothing.
Isn't that amazing when that happens? Yeah.
Yes.
I know. They're always it falls into 2 categories. There's the category of the things that I want and will never be able to afford.
Yes.
And they're the categories of the things that nobody wants except me, and I can never find.
Yes.
You know?
I'm familiar.
So yeah, I feel like one of the things that people miss now with the internet, as much as it really is exciting to be able to find almost everything you want, at least online, I miss being able to actually see the stamps
Yes.
and You know, that there's something beautiful about the actual stamp itself, you
That's
know.
correct.
Well, this is very convenient that you mentioned the one thing that you would like that you can never find. Now, I should temper this by saying that some people in this interview series have refused to answer this question. Because if people know what I'm looking for, it'll drive the price up. But if you're comfortable, could you tell us what that is?
Well, I think the major thing, which I will never get, I collect a small village in Nova Scotia called Eller's House. And it was founded by a German mining engineer back in 1865-ish. And he set up this little utopian village. He had a sugar beet factory, he had mills, he brought in workers from Germany, had farmland, logging, everything. And it's a fascinating story. And only once in my many years have I seen a cover addressed to Francis von Ellerhausen. And it was in a German catalog, probably in the 1980s, with the most prohibitive asking price. Never to be seen again.
Yeah.
So that was, I rue the day that I didn't even take my scissors and do a cutout. At least I would have had that. But, and of course, I've now forgotten the name of the auction house, et cetera.
Sure.
That's the one that I lost. Well, I didn't lose it. I never would have bought it, even at a 16th of the price.
Yeah, that's always a bit prohibitive for sure. So so would that be the big regret in your collecting journey, or are there other things that you passed up or wish that you'd known at the time that you should go after?
I don't regret. I'm not a regretter. Whatever happens, happens. It was meant to be. So I don't rue things except for that one cover.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, you never know. It might show up on the market again.
It might be in a dealer's box somewhere.
That's right.
Nobody
That's right.
else in the world having any interest in it.
I mean, I think that's the really fascinating part about stamp collecting is I collect a very unappreciated issue of the last of the King Albert I series stamps from Belgium. And nobody has written anything about this stamp, and no one cares at all about it. And occasionally something will come up and it'll be, you know, ridiculously cheap price because nobody realizes that it's the only final day of use that that stamp, you know, has, which works, you know, great. It's great for me. But on the other side of the coin, it won't be great for my family when they try to sell it at the end of my days on this planet. You know, people will be like, "Oh, this is just junk. We'll get rid of it." But to me, it's priceless. You know,
Yes.
and that's what I think is really interesting about this. So I'm assuming that you've already answered this question as well with what you just said. But what's the one thing that you would like to acquire that's just unattainable?
That one
Is there?
cover that
That's right.
previously mentioned, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say when they produce your tombstone, it will say, you know, fellow Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, collector of Nova Scotia postal history, and regretter over that one doggone cover.
Yes.
Yes. So what do you? Where's your focus currently now in your collecting? What what
It,
interests you?
it is social philately. When we went to Glasgow in 2000 to a major show there and to be exposed to social philately as a respected collecting interest, before, at least locally, it was always frowned upon. I can
Right.
remember doing one exhibit that had to do with canard mail between Halifax and Britain. And I thought, oh, well, those covers were carried by ships. Oh, ships are kind of interesting. One should include that in one's exhibit. And doing that, oh my goodness, I think I achieved probably lower than bronze, because you did not do that sort of thing. Ships are ships, letters are letters, postage is postage, but you don't put them together. But in Glasgow, it was quite respectable to put the social aspect in your collecting. And so I've done several collections, one having to do with a great uncle who was mauled by a bear in Rossland, BC, and died. And he had traveled the world, so there were all sorts of interesting covers that people in the family had squirreled away. But he also had a lady friend in Germany. And when he died, he left an annuity for the lady who became known as Aunt Gussie, who had another husband, by the way. And the family kept up with her for 35 years, went through the rise of Hitler in Germany, and she died just before the Second World War. But you can imagine, you know, this is social philately. You've got the setting, you've got the people, you've got the stamps, you've got the covers. What fun. It comes in, makes a story.
That's right. Do you find that's I know there's been a lot of talk about it that I've been aware of in Canada in the last year about social philately. Do you find that it's more respected and people are more open to it now than they were maybe in the last 10 years?
I think so. I think much more so. As they say, I've been doing this work on Eller's House, Ellershausen, the great uncle George and Gussie. Now was working on small covers. Well, that doesn't sound like anything very interesting, but the social aspect of small covers, tiny covers, before there were stamps, after the penny black, these covers evolved until the 1957 or something, when they were no longer legal. But the stories that those little covers tell, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you were to collect something else, you know, at any point in your life, if there was something else that you could collect that wasn't stamps, what would it be?
My husband's interested in old Sheffield plate.
Hmm.
And because we have to trot around to a lot of stores when we're away, looking at old Sheffield plate, I must say that it is of an interest to me as well. Yeah.
Very interesting.
I'm a rug hooker.
Oh, wow.
Hmm? And I did Queen Victoria, the penny black.
That's amazing.
It's a bit like a cartoon, but it was fun to do.
One of my favorite things that anybody's ever given me was a Sheffield steel letter opener, which has all the appropriate markings on it and all. And it's just spectacular, you know, just such a beautiful thing. So I understand the Sheffield plate attraction, you know, very very interesting.
It is a very interesting period.
So I wanted to ask you a couple questions about your experience with the RPSC and Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. I know that when I first approached you about doing this interview, that you weren't so eager to do it. Not that you were unwilling, but you just didn't seem to think that you would. Well, why don't you tell us why you felt the way you did?
Well, I don't feel that I am a serious collector like so many of my compatriots are. Uh, we've met so many people who are so knowledgeable, and they, have researched everything to the nth degree, and I understand it. It's not my path. My path has been this social and postal history path. We have so many acquaintances in our local club whose minds, if I could just have tiny bits of their minds, I mean, they are so knowledgeable, and I just feel so inferior when I hear them expounding on something. Not that they're doing it in a worrisome way. It's just, oh goodness, wouldn't it be wonderful to be that knowledgeable, to retain things?
Yeah. Well, that was as soon as you said that, I thought, okay, we absolutely have to interview you, because there's so many different paths that you can take in stamp collecting, and I like to call it philately because I think anybody that tries to bring order out of chaos, which is really what we stamp collectors do,
Yes.
is really a philatelist. But oftentimes I hear the criticism of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. People will say, well, you're only interested in serious philately, whatever that is, with quotes. You're only interested in exhibitors. I don't collect Canada, so there's no place for me here. And I think it's a tribute to the organization that somebody who took a different path, and I'm sure that a lot of the basis of your fellowship also is your remarkable record of service, which of course is another part of the fellowship track. But I'm just so grateful to think that we belong to an organization that actually really does value people who take an alternate path. And I'm very grateful to you for coming on and being willing to say that.
Yes, I don't feel that, I have to exhibit. I enjoy exhibiting, but I like to do it. I march to my own drummer. Yeah. I know that there is a wonderful manual that I could follow, but somehow it doesn't really encompass what I want to do. I daughter Jane is a judge. She knows all the ins and outs, and here she has this mother who's a bit of a flake, I guess you'd say.
A rule breaker. But I like in my own exhibiting, the reason I exhibit, I mean, I've done okay a few times, and I appreciate when those things happen. The reason that I exhibit is because it helps me to think more deeply about my collection and how I want to understand it.
Yes.
Uh, I'm quite certain I'm never going to win, the grand award at an international show. Partly because what I collect isn't really the kind of thing that judges see as being important. But for me, it's about organization and about learning and about understanding the whole trajectory of a stamp issue, which is where the story comes in.
Yes.
So
And when you do exhibit and you're pulling that exhibit together and you think you know what you have, and you go to mount that one cover and you can't answer any of the questions. So there you're get the books out, get the internet, and lose another 3 days of your life trying to figure what in the heck that means.
Well, and by doing that, I mean, again, while that might not be of any interest to anybody else, it
Yes,
makes your experience of your collection so much richer.
yes,
You know, and
exactly.
yeah, so we certainly agree on that. And for anybody that's watching this that feels that way, please know that there is a place in the RPSC for collectors
There
of
is.
all levels. And
I've met so
we're,
many people since joining the RPSC and since being a director, when we used to go to every show that we could possibly go to, and you meet the high class exhibitors, you meet the regular people, and some wonderful friendships have come out of it.
yeah, yeah. Somebody said to me at CAPEX, the only difference between the grand award winning collector and the collector who, you know, who specializes in something that maybe isn't going to win that award is usually the amount of time that you've got to spend on it and the amount of money that you've got to spend on it.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
but I've never found anybody in the hobby um, who was standoffish because of the level of their exhibiting. I think we're afraid of them because we think they're so brilliant and so accomplished. But I'm always amazed when I write to somebody or email somebody and say, "Can I ask you a question about this?" How generous the responses are, even from people who we consider in the pantheon of collecting.
When Peter and I go to stamp shows, bourses in particular, so often I get a very polite dealer or person saying, "And do you collect too?" Women's are still having trouble.
Well, and that's another reason why I really wanted to have you on here, um, is because there is the perception that it's such an overused phrase now, but it's accurate that stamp collecting is just old white men, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think part of it is I have to be careful how I say this. I think part of it is because people collect in different ways, and the people that get notice are very often the people who win the grand award. And unfortunately, although that is changing, unfortunately, for a long time, that's been primarily men. And I know from the RPSC, I mean, we have, you know, Dr. Jean Wang and
Oh
your
my
own
goodness.
daughter, and
Aren't we
people.
fortunate to have her?
Oh, and people like Michelle Cartier and any number of other people. I shouldn't start mentioning people because I'll forget somebody. But I mean, these people are just in the top grade of collectors worldwide.
Yes.
And that's why we were so glad when your daughter Jane. And we should mention that you are the only mother-daughter vice president team in the history of the RPSC. That's why it was so important for Jane to become vice president. We were so thrilled when she agreed to do it because it's really important for us to not be perceived as stuffy, old men, because there is a place for all collectors and there is a place um, for everyone here. And so I think that's one of the things that Sam Chu did such a great job at, who was the predecessor, my
Yes.
predecessor, is trying to lower the demographic age of the board and make it more diverse. And that's a priority for us going forward as well. So
Yes.
can I ask you, because you were around during probably at the end of the Harry Sutherland days, but from what I remember from talking to Jane, you actually knew him quite well. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, I didn't know him well, other than he did have Nova Scotia roots, so that made us a little bit simpatico. He was a character. That's sitting at meetings with Harry, it was always an experience. And of course, there was the cigarette break. No, not announced, just rose, left the room. And he being the secretary, it might have been a little important that he be there, but I can remember one time Don Wilson of St. John's, Newfoundland, who kind of took me under his wing. I don't know why, but he really got me involved with RPSC. Anyway, we were in Edmonton for the show, and Don Wilson had invited Peter and me and Mr. Sutherland, Harry, to dinner. And Don had a rental van, not a car, a van. And the dinner was to be in a revolving restaurant. So we were parking within the parking lot as it wound up and up and up. And he managed to get one of the columns, which took out the door of the van. Don didn't blink an eye. We just kept going. Meanwhile, Harry's saying, I've never had a decent meal in a restaurant that goes around. He being a guest. And I think that was Harry. I mean, he was so blunt. But afterwards, he had to admit that he had quite an excellent meal. So then that was Harry. I mean, I enjoyed him very, very much.
Yeah.
I went to his interment in New Glasgow as a representative of RPSC. And it was the most dramatic day ever. The storm clouds, the Presbyterian minister who was so dour. It was a picture that I think I will always have in my head. What a day, just drama. And it was Harry. Well deserved, Harry.
Very appropriate. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us that doesn't kind of fall under the parameters of the things we've been talking about?
Dear, I don't know. I'd like to say that I'm so glad that I did join RPSC. I should have done it much earlier than I did. Both Peter and I have enjoyed things that it has brought about, the travel and the people, Wonderful people.
That's great. Well, this has been a really wonderful interview, and thank you so much for doing it for us. We're grateful for all your years of service, and I know you continue to be involved, and very, very interesting. And I know everybody's going to feel that way as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and good luck in your new job.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And if you've enjoyed this and you've been inspired by the council to join the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, you can find out more about the organization by going to rpsc.org. Thanks, and we'll see you again.